Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I appreciate you joining me today. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I want to cover a topic that's adjacent to the career and professional success, which is your financial health and getting out of debt. This is becoming a more and more common request from either clients or referrals and people within my network that are coming to me for. And so I want to tell you some of the strategies that I've used, other strategies out there that maybe weren't for me and why, but how they could actually work for you because they do work for many people, and just general good financial decision making, and also how to prevent getting in debt, whether you are currently out of debt or once you are out of debt. And so before we dive in, as a reminder, link down below, join me every single Friday for a free live 1 hour Q&A webinar that I do. So sign up. That is linked down below in the description. If you have any one-off questions, maybe seeking particular career advice in a very, very small scope of questions or advice, then hit me up on Connect, which is linked down below. And if you're looking to work one-on-one together to take your career to the next level, make more money, or get you to where you want to go and turn your career aspirations into your real life story, take the quiz down below, which will book a free consultation at the end, and we can begin working together one-on-one. So without further delay, let's go ahead and dive in. So like I said, this is going to be a little bit adjacent. Most people are looking for career success and, compensation increases and getting to where they want to go and climbing the ladder. So they have financial success. But it's not just making money that gives you financial success. You also need to know what to do with it once you have it. And I am someone who have made lots of mistakes. I have literally cost myself millions. I have been 60,000 in debt. I have made very short-sighted decisions in spite of the long term. And we will talk about each of these along the way and kind of the ways, things that I learned from them and how to move forward from there. And so first things first that I want to say is the cost of potentially not having a good financial health, ironically, can also hurt your abilities to make money, because there's going to be companies who do background checks that actually are going to look at your credit history, look at your financial situation, and this can affect your career, especially maybe if you want a government job. This is very impactful on the clearance side of the equation. But there's also other companies that are in specific sectors, such as finance or capital investment, these sorts of industries where they're very money and finance focused, that having a bad financial history can prevent you from actually getting those opportunities. And it will decrease your job opportunities. It will decrease your ability to move forward. It also might decrease your ability to develop skills because you maybe don't have the money to spend to learn them, and so on and so forth. So like, it's this vicious cycle where in order to make more money, you also need to make good financial decisions, and you need to have both as a back and forth, back and forth. And if you can have the groundwork from the beginning to not only both make good career decisions, but make good financial decisions, you're just going to accelerate yourself completely tenfold. And so a couple of my stories summed up pretty quick here is I actually originally bought a house at 19 without assistance, which was phenomenal. Great decision. Where I did not have the decision was being short-sighted when it came to selling or renting. I had a couple roadblocks to renting that, hindsight 2020, were overcomable. Long story short, my HOA was preventing me, but I also could have gone around that. There was another mechanism at play. But instead, I just said, you know what? I'm tired of home ownership. I'm tired of my HOA. I'm just going to sell it. Sold it, made a decent amount of profit, made $100,000, and then turned around and said, you know what? I'm not going to work for 2 years. And blew all the money, incurred debt. And that is where I ultimately then led to around $60,000 total in debt, because not only did I blow that $100,000, but right before selling my house was in one of my most lucrative careers. I worked for oil and gas, and oil and gas just traditionally overpays. And I lived like it. I was constantly eating out, eating at high end dinners. I almost couldn't spend the money fast enough to actually spend it all. So this led to, when then I changed jobs, I kept living like that. So that's how I blew through that money really quickly, incurred a significant amount of debt, and then was looking back and going, okay, so I'm getting back into, after the two years off of work, I'm making half of what I was making in oil and gas. I now need to get back to making a decent amount of money. I now lost all those profits, and I'm actually negative $60,000 in debt. What do I do? And this is what led me to do a bunch of different scenarios and a lot of different psychologies, what it's going to be here for getting out of debt. But where I am now is I am not only not in debt at all, except for my house, but I also, have a multi 6-figure net worth and climbing, and I am almost 7-figure gross worth. And this is after being, like I said, $60,000 in debt and making multiple mistakes. I just to give you my biggest mistake, to where not only did I get in negative debt, but when I went back and ran the math on if I rented the house and kept it, to this day, I believe my total lost revenue in that, both from a home value and a rental profit perspective, is close to $600,000. So I have cost myself that, and that's just one opportunity that I made the mistake on. So how did I get out of debt? So I tried, of course, the traditional snowball method. So this is paying your smallest to largest debt off. Ignore the rates, ignore interest. And this is a good psychological framework to start with because you begin to see progress. And so, if you have something that's maybe a $500 debt or a, $5,000 debt, and you have one that's 10 and then 20, right? Like whatever it might be, this is not the most effective and efficient framework, but it's the most psychological one that a lot of people really get a lot of benefit from. And so my advice is to actually start with the snowball method if you're somebody who lacks discipline and lacks good mindset and fortitude, which generally is the case if you are in debt, and especially significantly in debt. So you lack a level of discipline. So just starting with, okay, what rank, let me list out all the money that I owe. In each individual component, and we'll just go smallest to largest. And that way you're knocking things off the board. You're not just seeing numbers go down. And so this is something that, like I said, I started with this. I ended up not really liking it because I felt it was so inefficient. Because my debt was in, it was in credit cards. It was also in a consolidation loan that I did before, which we'll touch on here in a second. And that was really, really, really where my debt was. And because I had decent limits on all of my credit cards, the smallest to largest just wasn't worth it. So then I actually switched to what's called the Avalanche method. The Avalanche method is taking the interest rates into account and going highest interest rate to lowest interest rate. And this was good because what got to me psychologically wasn't the lack of debt, but it was seeing that, you make a $500 payment and then have $300 in interest, and a $500 payment and $300 in interest. And you're just like, oh, this is infuriating. And so when I started to do this, and then I could actually see those interest payments chunk down, chunk down, chunk down on those high interest rate ones, especially with credit cards that are 20, 25, 30% interest rates, this was the psychological win for me. So I do recommend these as kind of the top two for most people as a starting spot, and especially depending on what your credit is, because the next one that I'm going to talk about is something that's super, super useful for getting out of debt if you can be disciplined. Because I can tell you that I have both done this successfully and unsuccessfully. Successfully came the second time after I learned my mistake of the first time, which is some form of consolidation. So debt consolidation does work, whether you do a debt consolidation loan, a line of credit, or a balance transfer card. Any of them work. Okay. Now, the ideal would actually be the balance transfer card, typically because these come with a 0% interest rate. So you're consolidating your debt not only from, to just say, hey, I have a lower interest rate, but actually no interest rate. And what you can do is look at the deal of the balance transfer card of how much it has to be and what the time frame is for 0% interest. Then look at that balance, figure out, literally do a divided by the number of months that you have zero interest for, and can you pay it off in that quick? Okay. That is money, money, money. If you can't, then looking at doing a line of credit or a loan as a second option, if they are lower interest rate, can also be ideal. Now, the danger with all three of these is I say this requires discipline because you are going to clear the balances of multiple sources of debt and put them into one. And so now that you see, oh, this credit card has $0 in debt, I can now incur some more debt. And if you then max that out again, then now you have double, right? Which is what I did the first time. Full transparency. This is how I got to that like $60,000 in debt. It was credit cards, consolidated credit cards. And then now I'm like, well, now I either need to do a giant consolidation loan or what do I do here? Right. So I did do another consolidation loan, and was able to do it much more intelligently in that scenario and said, you know what? I'm not going to incur a balance. My money is going towards paying this thing down. And so those are the three common ways that I recommend people to get out of debt. It's a snowball method, either going smallest to largest balance, avalanche method, which is highest to lowest interest rate, or debt consolidation, ideally with a balance transfer card or any other 0% interest deal, paying it off directly on time without incurring balance on anything else and keeping it that way. Now, going from here, now part of the biggest reason why people really struggle with debt and money in general is going to be the way that you budget. And so here's what I like to do here is I like to take this actually from both angles. So there's zero-based budgeting, which is meaning if I started with nothing, let me build up my budget from zero as to what is non-negotiable effectively. Okay, so that's avenue one. Avenue two, look at where you're spending your money. If you this is most easily done if you are using credit cards. If you're someone who heavily uses cash, it's going to be potentially more difficult for you to do. But if you are using credit cards, which is probably why you're in debt, then you want to look at all of your balances over the last 12 months, or sorry, all of your statements over the last 12 months. So do both of these exercises. So start with a zero-based budget. You got $0. What are your fixed costs? Think of your rent, your mortgage, your car payment, the things that you have to pay, or your life is genuinely screwed. Okay? List those out. Then adding on to the zero base, then look at your variable essentials is what I'll call them. So things like your gas or your groceries, or again, things that without you die, you can't work, you can't make money. Like these two categories should encompass the complete picture of what it takes for you to simply live, go to work, make money. Okay. Now, from here on the zero-based budgeting, then it depends on whether or not you are in debt or not in debt. So if you are in debt, since that's kind of what we've been talking about before, then I would stop at this point, look at the money left over. Okay. Now, from the money left over, then I would split this in thirds. Okay. I would do 1/3, either, okay, we'll split it in 50-50 or thirds. But thirds, depending on the amount, would be ideal. I would say if you are less than $1,000 left over, that probably just going 50-50 makes sense. So if you're over $1,000, splitting in thirds between paying off debt, saving money, and then fund money. So this way you can have the psychology of the fact that you are still able to live your life. You're not locked in a room and locked in a cage and unable to do anything with your life. But you still know that effectively 2/3 of your money is going towards healthy habits. And while you're paying off your debt slower because you're saving money, that saving money is what's going to prevent you from going further in debt, right? Because you might have something that happens with your car, you might have a medical procedure, you might have something unexpected. And so instead of having to remove the debt progress that you've made, you can absorb these things because you're saving money along the way. You're less than $1,000. I would just split 50-50. And I would go effectively 50% into debt. And well, actually, no, sorry. I would go 50% into debt, and then I would take the 50% remaining and split that into 25-25 between savings and fund. That's how I would do that. So you end up with a little less into the fund scenario. But this way you are consistently putting the majority of your money towards your debt in that sort of equation. Now, if you are not in debt, again, remember, all we've lined out thus far is what your fixed costs are and your variable essentials. So what it needs for you to live and what it means for you to make money. Okay. So from if you are not in debt, then what we're going to do is we're going to list your savings goals and your targeted funds. So savings goal is going to be what's ideal for you, right? This is going to come first. Putting this before additional spending is what's going to allow you to save properly. And targeted funds are things like, you know what? Like I want to be able to travel every single year and my average vacation costs me $1,000. Okay. What is that broken down per month? Or we'll say $1,200 for easy math. So you need to save $100 a month. So in addition to your savings goals, you need to save $100 a month so that you can go on vacation and not incur any debt for going on vacation. Okay. So this is how you begin to do this: is you want to do targeted funds and your savings goals. And other examples, like I mentioned before, if you know that you get 3 oil changes a year and those oil changes cost you $300 and every 2 years you get tires or whatever, so like car maintenance, make that a targeted fund. This breaks down to about $30 a month or whatever the number is. Combine all of this for your savings goals so you can absorb these hits. You can absorb the known knowns and your non-negotiables. Okay. Then, only after you have done your fixed living costs, your variable living costs, and your savings and targeted funds, then we get into discretionary spending. And this is going to be things like eating out, having fun, going to concerts, seeing friends, whatever it might be. Okay. List out what those are from a non-negotiable standpoint. Remember, zero-based budgeting is only going from zero to all of your non-negotiables. Okay. So if you deem that, like, I don't need Netflix and Amazon, pick one. Okay. So after you've gone through this exercise, you might still have some money left over. Again, if you are not in debt, then you take all that remaining money and invest it all straight up, 100% of it, because you've taken care of your living expenses, you've taken care of your bills, you've taken care of your savings for your emergency fund. You're also taking care of your discretionary spending. Anything else is just icing on the cake. Invest it. Invest it in stocks. Invest it in paying your house off faster. Invest in your 401k or your Roth IRA, whatever it might be. Precious metals, crypto, ETFs. That's for you to make. I'm not the financial advisor who's going to tell you how to invest your money. Okay. But this is a nice little formula for both how to pay the getting out of debt or preventing debt, right? Recap real quick. You're going to do overall the core costs of what it means for you to live: your house, your mortgage, your rent, your gas, your groceries, etc. Okay. Then you're going to go into splitting that remaining money into thirds between debt payoff, savings, um, and fund money, or you're going to go into 50% to debt payment, 25% into savings, and 25% into fund money. Latter is if you have less than $1,000 left over. The former of equal thirds is if you have over $1,000 left over. If you're not in debt at all, then you're just going to move forward after your living essentials into what are your savings and your targeted funds, what is your discretionary spending, and then what's left over, and invest it. Okay. Now, one of the things that I also get asked about, because it relates very heavily to your career and is a common question for every single job that you get, is what about 401k and HSAs, right? Because these are common things that are offered through your employer. And so I want to give you my 2 cents. Again, please understand that this is not a scientific framework. I'm not guaranteeing you make money, but here's how I see the pros and cons. Okay. So I think HSAs are really solid. Because it is pre-tax money as opposed to post-tax money that you can then spend on your healthcare. And so especially if you have something that, you know, that you have a decent amount that you're going to have to spend, this is money that otherwise would have been taxed that you would have then been paying the health bills on. And then also you not only would have to incur the tax, but you have to incur the health bill. Now, the HSA typically comes with a higher deductible. So what this means is it'll be the higher that you pay out of pocket before the insurance covers everything. And so that's where you need to maybe run some math there and look at the premiums, look at the out of pocket, and look how much you plan to invest in your HSA and figure out kind of what striking that balance is. But I almost always choose the HSA because the thing that I'm going to throw in here is the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is healthcare. It is the reason. It is people having unexpected procedures, unhealthy habits, etc. So actually the best investment you can make is to just be healthy. Don't eat the junk food, exercise, move more, eat less, be healthy, right? If you are being healthy from a preventative standpoint, then the HSA almost always wins because it's not being consistently withdrawn from. It's just racking up and racking up and racking up and racking up, right? And especially, if you can set aside $50 to $100 of pre-tax money, so we're talking post-tax out of your paycheck, you're maybe missing somewhere between like 30 to 70 bucks in a month, right? That's if you do the $100, that's $1,000 a year, $1,200 a year that you now have to put towards medical expenses. And if you only have medical issues once every couple years, that's thousands of dollars that, like, for missing 70 bucks a month on your paycheck, whoosh, wiped, done, end of story. So I typically do recommend the HSA unless the math is just so far in the other way because of maybe the max out of pocket or the premium cost, things like that. Now, the more debatable one and the more fun topic, I think, is the 401k and Roth IRA. So this is one that, again, your argument is coming down to pre-tax and post-tax. And here's ultimately what you're banking on. So 401k is your pre-tax investment. There's two things to know here. If your employer does a match, I will always advise you to do at least the match. You should never be doing nothing in a 401k if your employer doesn't match, because that's free money. It is just straight up free principal. Now, the downside is because it is pre-tax, when you then go to withdraw from it later in life, that is when it gets taxed. So the question you're asking yourself when it comes to 401k versus Roth IRA is the tax rate lower? Is it going to be lower in the future, or is it going to be lower right now? And if it's going to be lower right now, that's what your bet is. Invest in your Roth IRA more than your 401k. If you believe the taxes in the future will be down, invest in your 401k and less in your Roth IRA. Okay. Now, your Roth IRA also presents other tax deductions. Both Roth IRA and 401k reduce your taxable income overall. So you want to understand that at the end of the year. And so what this means is that you will owe less at the end of the year. But it is up to you to pick which one makes the most sense. They each have their pros and cons. And the question is, do you think that the tax situation will be better in the future, or do you think it'll be better right now? But never, under any circumstance, should you be leaving your employer match on the table. And this is, again, because it's just free money. Now, the last piece of advice that I want to cover here, actually two last pieces of advice, are going to be: treat your credit cards like cash, because then it's cash with rewards. The downside to cash is simply the fact that you get what you get and you pay what you pay, and end of story. But if you put things on a credit card and you are able to pay it off, then you don't incur interest and you get rewards. That is actually part of what's being built into somewhat of the cost of things, or when it comes to the credit card processing fees, is they're paying for those things through rewards. So that's what that money is going towards. So if you do use credit cards responsibly, it actually can be a benefit to you to where your dollars begin to go farther because of the rewards programs. And the last thing I want to give, because of my own accidental discovery, I will say here, is make friends with your banker and loan people. And so this was something that when I went to purchase my first car, it was after I purchased my house. And so I went to go buy a car. I was a first-time car buyer. And so when I went to the dealership, I had a little bit to go down, so on and so forth. They came back with a 9.1, 9.2% interest rate, something insane. And I told them, and I was like, hey, why is this high of an interest rate? This is asinine. Like, I know what prime is. This is not right. And they said, well, you're a first-time car buyer. I said, yes, but I'm a homeowner as well. So I bought something that is worth more, takes more, and is a longer loan value. And I have really good credit. I was at like 70, 80, 790 at the time from a credit score. They're like, yeah, but it doesn't matter. None of those other asset purchases are relevant to you being a first-time car buyer. So I called who I worked with on my house. We had a great relationship. Things were phenomenal. I called him and said, hey, what can your bank or what can you do for me on a car loan right now? Here's the car value. Here's the car. Here's the length of what I'm looking for, so on and so forth. And he came back with like a 3.8 interest rate. So I went back to the dealership and I said, hey, I have 3.8 line of a loan right now from my banker. Am I going with him or am I going with you? They then came back with a 3.5%. And so this was one where I called my banker and I said, hey, I appreciate you doing that, but they actually were able to beat your rate. Are you sure you can't beat it? He couldn't match the 3.5. So I went with that. But because I had not just, the good relationship with him, or not just the purchasing relationship with him, but I had a good one as well, to where I could literally just call him out of the blue. This served me well and saved me hundreds of dollars a month on my payment. He and I then worked later on a different project of trying to figure out how to take the equity in my home and turn it into a HELOC or a home equity loan or something to where I could use it to then to put back into the house or refinance it in a variety of different ways. So I always stayed in relationship with him and always used him every single time, built that relationship. And this is something that had saved me hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of dollars over time. So like I said, this video is a little bit different. If you like me kind of maybe delving into these other topics or want me to dive deeper into any particular area, leave a comment down below. If you like this, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the notification bell to make sure you get that. We are also live on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, and Instagram. And again, just as a reminder, we do live weekly webinars every single Friday, link down below. If you are looking for a coach to help you out one-on-one to make new money, figure out where your career is going, transition careers, whatever it might be, take the quiz down below, which will end in a booking at the free consultation. And maybe you just have a question for me. You need, a career coaching answer on one small aspect of your career. Hit me up on the Connect. That is also linked down below. So until next time, I appreciate you joining me, and I wish you good financial health and career growth as well. Thank you.